The spirit of Christmas is a powerful thing. Once it descends upon you, the spirit of peace, love, and goodwill can end family disputes, mend fences between neighbors, and even bring war to a standstill. A remarkable thing happened on Christmas Eve in 1914. In the dank, muddy trenches on the Western Front of the First World War, guns ceased firing as the spirit of Christmas overcame hostilities for the entrenched combatants on both sides of the battlefield. For a moment in history, men put aside their differences, laid down their weapons, and refused to let the misery of war win the day. Soldiers began singing Christmas carols to their enemies across no man's land, and then the unimaginable happened. Today we look back at the Christmas Truce, one of the most storied moments of the Great War. So if you're curious, let's take a walk through history. In the summer of 1914, Europe went to war. The assassination of Austria-Hungary's Archduke Ferdinand by Serbian nationalists led to a declaration of war by Austria-Hungary against Serbia. Russia, who were allied with Serbia, began to mobilize troops in response to the declaration. And then the coalition of dominoes began to fall rapidly, setting off a succession of allies aligning themselves on either side of the battlefield. Germany, allied with Austria, declared war on Russia and immediately began an invasion of Russia's ally France through neutral Belgium. Great Britain, who was allied with France, then declared war on Germany. Within a few months, hundreds of thousands of soldiers had been killed in heavy fighting. The German advance had been halted at the Marne, and the race to the sea between Germany and the Allies had played out at Ypres. The result was a bloody stalemate with front lines that stretched from Switzerland to the North Sea. By December 1914, trench warfare had settled in. For those on the Western Front, life was a shared misery between enemies on each side, who were in some places separated by 50 yards or less. And to make matters worse, the Industrial Revolution enabled mass production of new and devastating tools of war, including fleets of airplanes and guns that could fire hundreds of rounds of ammunition per minute. When the war started just 6 months earlier, most soldiers figured it would end quickly, and they'd be home in time for the holidays. Not only would the war continue 4 more years, it would also prove to be the bloodiest conflict ever up to that point. But amid the fury and bloodshed, a miracle descended upon the battlefield that calmed the hearts, minds, and guns of the soldiers and delivered a day of peace. The miracle of Christmas. The first signs that something wondrous was happening occurred on Christmas Eve. At 8:30 p.m., a Royal Irish Rifles officer reported that Germans had illuminated their trenches, decorating Christmas trees with candles. It seems German Emperor Wilhelm II contributed the Tannenbaum to the frontline soldiers in an effort to bolster morale. Signs reading, "You no fight, we no fight," popped up above the German trenches. And German soldiers were also singing songs and wishing British forces a happy Christmas. Then Walter Kirchhoff, a tenor with the Berlin Opera, came forward and sang Stille Nacht. In the clear, cold night of Christmas Eve, his voice echoed over no man's land. Shooting ceased, and soldiers from both armies basked in the beauty of that moment. Once Kirchhoff finished the song, the British forces echoed the song Silent Night as a response to the tenor. It seems the beauty of the music and the magnitude of the moment was the stepping-off point for the Christmas truce. British soldier Private Frederick Heath wrote home saying, "The truce began late that night, when all down our line of trenches there came to our ears a greeting unique in war. English soldier, a Merry Christmas! Come out, English soldier, come out here to us." For some little time we were cautious and did not even answer. Officers fearing treachery ordered the men to be silent, But up and down the line, one heard the men answering that Christmas greeting from the enemy. How could we resist wishing each other a Merry Christmas, even though we might be at each other's throats immediately afterwards? So we kept up a running conversation with the Germans, all the while our hands ready on our rifles. Blood and peace, enmity and fraternity, war's most amazing paradox. The night wore on to dawn, a night made easier by songs from the German trenches, the pipings of piccolos, and from our broad lines, laughter and Christmas carols. Not a shot was fired. As if the ceasing of hostilities and singing of Christmas carols across the battlefield that Christmas Eve wasn't miraculous enough. What happened the following morning, on Christmas Day, was unimaginable. Captain Edward Hulse of the Scots Guard peered across the no man's land of the Western Front at a bewildering sight. 4 unarmed German soldiers had climbed out of their trenches and were advancing over the shell-cratered field toward British lines. Normally this would be a death sentence for anyone to enter the kill zone, but now there was no firing. Mystified, Hulse, dressed in an overcoat and an old stocking cap, went out to meet them. When he asked by what orders they had come, they replied none. They had just come over out of goodwill. To varying degrees across the front, German and British troops lay down their weapons and socialized. German soldiers emerged from their trenches, calling out Merry Christmas in English, and British soldiers came out cautiously to greet them. One British soldier, a rifleman named J. Redding, wrote a letter home to his wife describing his holiday experience in 1914. My company happened to be in the firing line on Christmas Eve, and it was my turn to go into a ruined house and remain there until 6:30 on Christmas morning. During the early part of the morning, the Germans started singing and shouting, all in good English. They shouted out, "Are you the rifle brigade? Have you a spare bottle? If so, we will come halfway, and you come the other half." Later on in the day, they came towards us, and our chaps went out to meet them. I shook hands with some of them, and they gave us cigars. We did not fire that day, and everything was so quiet, it seemed like a dream. In a letter to his mother, British Army Captain Edward Hulse wrote he experienced the most extraordinary Christmas in the trenches you could possibly imagine. One of the Germans started off by saying that he thought it only right to come over and wish us a happy Christmas, and trusted us implicitly to keep the truce. In some areas of the Western Front, the truce was just an opportunity for each side to bury their dead strewn across no man's land. But where Saxon forces faced off against British forces, there was a spirit of goodwill, sharing of tobacco, singing, drinking, and of course, football. Several accounts from the truce involve football matches played in no man's land. A doctor attached to the Rifle Brigade published accounts in the Times on January 1st, reporting a football match played between them and us in front of the trench. Now I feel it necessary at this point to remind you that just days earlier these same soldiers were facing off in horrific trench warfare. For the most part, living conditions in the trenches during the cold, dark, wet days of December were grueling in and of themselves. Never mind that your enemy, some 50 yards in front of you, was lobbing bullets at you and would be all the merrier, knowing that you were killed. But today, Christmas Day, all anyone wanted to do was play. For the most part, the football matches were played with made-up footballs. In fact, one of our own viewers, Kimmy, relayed a story of a family member who fought in the war. The soldier and her family met the German soldiers by a river on Christmas Day. They tied his coat into a ball and used it to play soccer. They also shared a couple of boxes of wine they had liberated and rationed back and forth between them. Both sides shared stories of their families, and they laughed. The laughter was the really special part, but also the really hard part the following day. Both sides wished each other a safe return before going back to their trenches from the river that night, knowing the next day the fighting would begin again. Some accounts do mention that real footballs were indeed used on that day, but whether the balls belonged to the soldiers or found from nearby towns is unclear. What is known is that playing a pickup game in the middle of no man's land on the Western Front during the war was not lost on those involved. Sergeant Bob Lovell of the 3rd London Rifles wrote home saying, "I can scarcely credit what I have seen and done. It has indeed been a wonderful day. We finished up in the same old way, kicking a football about between the two firing lines. So football in the firing lines between the British and the Germans is the truth, as I was one that played." When Boxing Day arrived the next morning, many troops anticipated hostilities to resume, and in most places along the front they did. However, there were some areas along the front that maintained peace through the new year. This gave soldiers time to rest, recover, and recollect upon the truce. Soldiers wrote home the day after to their families, to their wives, and to their parents, saying, "You won't believe this. It was like a waking dream." Henry Williamson, a 19-year-old private in the London Rifle Brigade, wrote to his mother on Boxing Day. "Dear Mother, I am writing from the trenches. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. Beside me is a coke fire, opposite me a dugout with straw in it. The ground is sloppy in the actual trench, but frozen elsewhere. In my mouth is a pipe presented by the Princess Mary. In the pipe is tobacco. Of course, you say, but wait. In the pipe is German tobacco. Ha ha, you say, from a prisoner or found in a captured trench? Oh dear no. From a German soldier. Yes, a live German soldier from his own trench. Yesterday, the British and Germans met, shook hands in the ground between the trenches, exchanged souvenirs. Yes, all day Christmas Day, as I write. Marvelous, isn't it?" While soldiers were enjoying the day, many of the Army's leaders were horrified. British General Sir Horace Smith-Dorrien wrote in a confidential memo that this is only illustrative of the apathetic state we are gradually sinking into. There are even some accounts that soldiers were punished for fraternization, and top command issued orders that it should never happen again. The following December, Allied units were to mount raids and harass the opposing line. Communication with the enemy was halted by artillery barrages along the front line throughout the day. Now, on the German side, a general order posted at the end of 1914 banned fraternization with the enemy, warning German troops that every approach to the enemy would be punished as treason. The Christmas truce had the most success in areas where British troops faced Saxon regiments, but was not widely adopted in French-controlled areas of the front. Germany had spent most of 1914 overrunning a huge swath of French territory, and animosity toward the occupiers was too strong. There was also no truce on the Eastern Front, as Russia was still operating under the Julian calendar, and so the Russian Orthodox Christmas would not be observed until early January. But for the men who did experience the Christmas truce of 1914, they could scarcely believe the remarkable events that transpired around them, and they recognized, even in the moment, the unique and historic significance of the day, the power of the human spirit, and above all, the spirit of Christmas. One British soldier, Murdoch Wood, recalled in 1930, "I then came to the conclusion that I have held very firm ever since, that if we had been left to ourselves, there would never have been another shot fired." Adolf Hitler, then a corporal of the 16 Bavarians, saw it differently. "Such a thing should not happen in wartime," he said. "Have you no German sense of honor?" And in those two sentences spoken by two different people fighting in the same war, it's clear to see the difference between love and hate. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time as we explore more curious history. Take care.